Hello, everyone. This is Greg Drevenstedt, editor-in-chief at Rider Magazine, and your host for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. Our guest today is Andy Goldfine. Andy is the founder of Aerostich and the inventor of the Roadcrafter suit. Andy is also an advocate and organizer for the International Motorcycle and Scooter Ride to Work Day, which takes place on the third Monday in June. The 30th annual Ride to Work Day is coming up on June 21st. Well, hello, Andy. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, most people that listen to this podcast certainly know about Aerostich. They know about the Roadcrafter suit. Basically, the Aerostich catalog is something that I've looked forward to receiving for years. I've been able to wear some Roadcrafter suits. Both of those things have been developed kind of a cult-like following over the years. But I don't know if everybody knows that when you invented the Roadcrafter back in the early 80s, textile apparel, which is really common now, was not common then. So
that's correct.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit of the backstory on not only Aerostich and Roadcrafter, but you as a motorcyclist.
Well, you gave me half a dozen questions to study on before we started this. And the first one was, how long have you been riding? And I started riding when I was 15 and a half years old, or 15, on an illegal mini bike, which no license plate. And I actually technically started riding when I started bicycling as probably a third grader or second grader or something like that. I remember where I was and the exact moment when I first balanced a bicycle. The night before the training wheels had come off, my mother and I had a long discussion about whether I was ready. There were no balance bikes at that point. It was a big deal when I first started pedaling and balancing. I can remember it. I can take you to the exact spot it happened. And ever since, I've just enjoyed the experience of riding, of balancing. I think it's magic, and I think it's medicine. I think it's just good for us.
So I know you're based in Duluth, Minnesota, right on the Lake Superior up there. Did you grow up in that area? Did you learn to ride in Minnesota?
I grew up in the center of Duluth in a fairly dense neighborhood. Duluth is on a pretty steep San Francisco-like hillside with a very cold lake right next to it and a big commercial harbor. There's a lot of foggy days. Winters are long and dark. But I've been a rider, and I connect riding with lots of other balance activities that people do: skiing, sailing, skating, surfing, dancing, much more. We're made to be sort of wigglers and balancers, and if you don't get a dose of that every day, your life isn't as good. You don't feel as good. At least I don't.
Well, like anything else, you use it or lose it. I mean, motorcycling is a perishable skill. Especially if you've got long winters, you've got to probably kind of reacquaint yourself with riding and just sort of getting the cobwebs out every spring.
Mm-hmm. Yes, as the older you get, the longer that spring reacquaintance period actually takes. It used to be just a few days when I was a kid that I was back in the groove, and now it's a few weeks of kind of wobbling a little bit more than I should. But then it comes once you ride regularly, it becomes second nature. All the little micro moves that you make to put the key in the bike and to lift the center side stand and to handle the controls or turn on and off the petcock if your old bike has one of those. All that stuff becomes second nature. The same with locking your helmet to the bike somewhere if you want to go into a grocery store, or getting in and out of a Roadcrafter suit. It becomes second nature when you do it again and again and again. By the time you've been riding a couple of weeks, you don't even think about it. It becomes simpler than using a car even. And the car makers have certainly spent 100 years trying to make cars really simple to use. That's what Ride to Work Day is partly all about, is to get people into everyday use of a motorcycle if they choose to, or if their circumstances will allow it. That's coming up. It's Monday, June 21st, which is very soon, Ride to Work Day. Maybe talk about that a little later.
Sure. So you learned to ride a bicycle like many of us, then a mini bike, which you said was not fully legal. I think that's probably common for a lot of people that learned as a teenager to ride a mini bike. So how did you get from there to basically inventing the Roadcrafter suit and sharing that with the world?
I started riding legally with a license plate on a Honda 90 at 16, a few days after taking the driver's test, just after my 16th birthday. And I rode to high school and ever since. And at that time, Japanese bikes were a revolution in how much higher quality they were than the European made and American made bikes. So you could buy a Honda 90 for $325 or $350, and the thing would run, 50,000, 40,000 miles without much attention. In those old Honda 90s, the crank bearings were bigger than the diameter of the piston. So just about. It was they were very high quality machines, and the Japanese bikes still are one of the highest quality in general bikes that you can get. So bikes were an everyday thing always for me, and when I was in my 20s, I kept hearing from adults, from responsible people, questions like, "Are you still riding that motorcycle?" And the implication always was, "You're going to grow out of this pretty soon. You're going to grow up and be like the rest of us and get a Chevrolet." And when I was I think about 28, I decided that I wasn't ever going to grow up out of this. That this was, I liked the experience of the kinesthesia of riding and the balancing so much that I just threw in the towel. And at that time, I was a weekend trail bike rider doing AMA enduros and riding with buddies. And the bike had a license plate, even though it was only marginally legal. And I decided I better just get legit. And I bought a BMW R100, a used, which, as I looked at street bikes, seemed to be one of the lighter, bigger, it was one of the longer suspension, lighter weight, big street bikes available at that time. So I figured I could still go on gravel roads and do what I was used to doing, compared to the Triumphs and Ducatis and all the Japanese bikes. They were light and they had a pretty good suspension system. So then I was riding that to my job, commuting on a fully legal, with turn signals and everything, BMW. And about that same time, the work side of the work-life balance really wasn't going so well for me, and I was not a happy guy doing what I was doing, and didn't really like working with who I was working with. And I decided I would try and start a business. And at that time, all of the industrial sewing and fabric mills and everything was involving our clothing was leaving America for Asia. And so all the garment factories, all the textile mills, all the people who made buttons and whatever, they were all closing and going bankrupt, and their equipment was up for auction. And I went to several garment factory auctions and sort of learned what was going on. You could buy a commercial sewing machine, maybe that cost $3,500, for $50 or $150. And some of the other bidders were from Asia or represented people from Asia buying up all that. There were 1 million garment and textile workers in the United States just before I started Aerostich. And that's gone down to just, a few tens of thousands from 1 million. There's not much of that industry left in this country. And there's been books written about how environmentally destructive the fast fashion business is, where you go into a mall and you can buy a blouse or a pair of jeans and you wear it a few times and then you can literally throw it away. It's so cheap. So I wanted to make something. I was always good making things, in my imagination anyway. And so the machines that I ended up with had been from a factory here, which had made winter coats and snowmobile suits. And in industrial sewing, the equipment is specialized. So if you want to make t-shirts, you need special t-shirt sewing machines. If you want to make jeans, jean sewing machines. And the equipment I had 16 sewing machines that were specifically for making winter clothing. And I started looking around for what could I make with this stuff. And I looked at, and I knew I wanted to make something of my own. I didn't want to be a contractor for someone else's designs. I wanted to have my own brand. And I looked at fly fishing vests, and they were all good. I looked at foul weather gear for offshore sailing. They were all good. Ski jackets, there was tons of good ski jackets. I looked at everything that I had remotely ever done and found there was all kinds of good stuff out there that I didn't think I could do any better than. But there wasn't really a solution for people who wanted to commute on a motorcycle. That would, at that time, there were very good leathers from Schott and Langlets and Bates and a bunch of other the old leather. If you were a serious rider, you either had English waxed cotton suit or a leather clothing that was very expensive, heavy, and hot. And there was almost nothing in between. There was cheap windbreakers with racing stripes on them that didn't have anything, and you wore jeans which you knew would not help you in a crash. So I thought maybe I could make something kind of like a snowmobile suit, a coverall, but with armor in it, and make the fabric heavy enough so that you could slide down the road. And so I started experimenting with different fabrics. I built a hinge platform that bolted to the rear bumper of a pickup truck. We put some weight on it. We filled the sandbags with a powder that was heavy and white so that when they would shred through, they would leave a streak on the pavement. And then we would go out to county roads and drag these sandbags made of leather and made of Cordura and made of Kevlar, all this stuff. We drag them down the roads and see what lasted and what didn't. And we were having a pretty good time trying to figure out how to make this coverall, me and a couple of people who were working with me. And there's a lot of funny stories. A guy came out in fuzzy slippers and a bathrobe to his rural mailbox on this county road where we were dragging these bags, wanting to know what government we worked for. And of course, we just packed up our stuff and left and said, thank you, we're sorry, we're putting white marks on your road. The rain will wash them away. And pretty soon I made this coverall and then ran into resistance from the motorcycling community, especially people who back in the day were the experts like you are today. They were not open-minded, most of them. A few were. A fellow named Stephen L. Thompson was very open-minded and wrote about it in his editorial columns. A fellow named Mark Lindemann, who you know, was a technical editor of the largest magazine at the time was Cycle in circulation, and he was the tech editor for Cycle, and he wrote about it and he got it. He understood what its purpose was. And my hope was to have enough guys or women who wanted to commute on a motorcycle to have an easy solution, sort of an all-in-one, like James Bond jumping out of the wetsuit in the early Goldfinger movie to go do some sort of spy work with a tuxedo on. And that was the concept, except that the commuting was the real thing. If you lived farther than 4 or 5 miles from where you worked, you really couldn't use a bicycle. And I didn't want to drive a car. And a motorcycle to me combines the speed of a car and most of the health benefits of a bicycle without the aerobic piece. And I wanted something to hang in the garage next to a helmet, jump in every morning and get to work. And the cycle journalists, your predecessor, Mark Tuttle, and before him, a guy named Mike Stubblefield, a guy from Texas who worked at Ryder. Mark was just starting out at Ryder. He was like the shop guy who was washing bikes in the parking lot and getting them ready for photography. But he got it, and Stubblefield got it. And the journalists who had to ride from, the internet wasn't around. You had to ride to an office where there was a typewriter. And all of the cycle magazines were made in Los Angeles somewhere, almost all of them. And all of the guys like you back in that time had to get up in the morning and put on their leathers and then ride across the LA grid and then take off their leathers and then sit at the typewriter and generate their copy. And they loved this thing. It was easy, it was fast, and we received a ton of, I went to Los Angeles a couple times to try and explain it, and it caught on with the journalists after about 2 years or 3 years. And at one point, all the journalists had them in all the magazines. There's an old copy of Motorcyclist that we framed and hung on the wall of our facility. It shows 4 guys on 4 different test bikes. It was like a 600cc sport bike comparison, and they're all wearing the same suit, Aerostich. And of course, the people who, were coming along trying to sell other kinds of things for riders to wear, companies did not like. BMW had a great line of clothing, and they didn't want to see their bikes tested with Aerostich at the time originally. But it became the uniform.
Sure.
About the time you came into the industry, it was the uniform, and that's the story of how it started.
It's funny because I remember when I started at Ryder in 2008, and soon after that, Mark put me in touch with you, and we got me measured up for a Roadcrafter. And he told me the story about, back in the 80s when you went around to the various publications in person, and you had you had your samples of your suit, and you basically had to give the pitch because you, as you mentioned, you had some resistance. And so there was some convincing that had to happen. But once they were convinced, then nobody would give up their Aerostich suit.
That's right. And they've lasted much longer. I still hear from people who says, I got a suit that used to be Greg's or somebody's suit, and it's 20 years old and it needs a piece of zipper repair or a Velcro or something. They last a super long time. They're really an investment. And that's what I was going for. When we decided how to grade them for fit and size, we first of all didn't want to make them to order like custom leathers.
Sure.
We wanted them off the rack. Like you'd go into a men's clothing store, if you were an attorney, say, or a medical doctor or selling real estate or something. Back in those days, you'd go into a men's clothing store and you said, I need a suit for work. And they would sell you a 42 long, and maybe they would say, come back Wednesday and we'll make this one sleeve a little bit longer, or let it in higher, take it out there. That was the business model I wanted. So we had a large inventory of stock sizes to sell off the rack. We still have quite a few. That's still an important business. And so it wasn't custom tailored like racing leathers.
Sure.
But it was always focused on commuting in my mind. And the odd thing is that most motorcyclists want to ride for reasons of fun and coolness and fashion. And so the people who were buying them weren't magazine editors who had to get on a bike at 7:30 in the morning. They were people who wanted to ride to Yellowstone or Alaska or South America for a 2-week vacation. So all these recreational riders were buying these coveralls, and still going to work in a Chevy or a Toyota. And so the business didn't come out quite exactly what I was thinking it might.
Right.
But it's still here, and I'm still enjoying it. So.
Well, so you've been making the Roadcrafter suits, and I know there's variations. There's the original 1-piece, there's a 2-piece, and then you've had lighter weight versions and different fabric versions over the years. But the Aerostich catalog, which is something that has all of it's like this curated set of gadgets. So like you can look at all of the Roadcrafter options and different suits and apparel that you wear, but you've also got, everything from boots and gloves and base layers to camping gear. So how did the Aerostich catalog, which is its own sort of thing, how did that get started?
Well, it got started for 2 reasons. One, I wanted the business to be solvent and successful. And it's very difficult to make much money selling clothing in America. That's why it all did go to Asia. And Aerostich has never been a gold mine type business. We're solvent, and but we still owe the bank money, and we still sometimes have to struggle in the wrong part of the year to make the payroll and all that stuff. But the second layer was that I really wanted to present using a motorcycle as part of an ordinary person's world, the sort of the world writ whole. So you didn't sort of stop your life and in my mind, this is me, not everybody. In my mind, you didn't stop your life to go riding like you'd stop your life to go sailing or skiing or something like that. And that's how most people consume motorcycling in America. But in my mind, it was an entire way to live, so that if you had to go to cross country, you had to have, all that stuff you mentioned in the catalog, very little of that was bolt onto your bike. When you get a typical aftermarket company's catalog, it has racks and accessories that fit that particular model and year of bike. I wanted stuff you would have in your house or have in your pocket or carry on your pack that would make motorcycling easier. So we sold 3 different regular umbrellas, because when you're traveling on a motorcycle, you're standing around outdoors, and an umbrella, whether it's a super hot sunny day or rain, is a very handy thing to have. But you don't know that unless you sort of give up on your car and start riding every day. And so we filled the catalog with tents that I thought were most appropriate for motorcycle travelers, and sleeping bags the same, and umbrellas, and a couple of little cook kits. We're not a real outfitter for, expedition. There's other kinds of outfitters that have a lot deeper selection of flashlights and knives and little stoves and stuff. But I wanted enough of it, like you said, curated for people who motorcycle. And one example is in the little tent area. If you are a motorcycle traveler, there is a chance that you'll find yourself wanting to put up a tent in an area where there's all pavement. I've had to do this. It's not very much fun. It's not like camping on dirt. But if you have to put up your tent in a parking lot somewhere, and there is no grass to do anything, you can't have a tent that needs to be staked into the ground. You have to have a dome style tent that just sort of sits there. And so we have 1 person and 2 person and 3 person and 4 person versions of the dome style tent, because that's really what you need if you're not sure where you're going to need to put that tent. So it's curated. And if you go to a real outdoor place like REI or even Amazon, you'll see a million tents, not just 3 or 4 that are well suited for motorcycle traveling.
Right.
So the catalog was an attempt to inferentially present to our audience how to be a motorcyclist in a way that I think is good.
Well, one of the things I've always liked about the catalog, I don't know who first told me about the catalog, but I called up and ordered one and had one sent to me, is that it's not just a catalog of apparel and useful items, but you've got all this like pearls of wisdom. You've got some philosophical, maybe little essays up front. You've got all these interesting little descriptions of products. I know you've got Mr. Subjective. And for me, one of my favorite things has been the selection of books that you have in there. Is that some of my favorite motorcycling books I found and ordered through the Aerostich catalog. The Melissa Holbrook Pearson's The Perfect Vehicle was a perfect example. And there are various other books that I may not have found. And again, this was the late 90s when I first got an Aerostich catalog, and the internet was in its infancy. So it was something like that catalog was the best way to find out some of that, how to find.
Well, we certainly had a ton of fun making it. I really loved being the zealot, or I don't know how to pronounce it, zealot or evangelist or whatever you want to call it, for this stuff. And we had fights about which the people I work with would say, well, this book doesn't sell. And I say, I don't care. It's a really good book about motorcycling. We're keeping it.
Sure.
And so I guess, as Mel Brooks would say, it's good to be the king sometimes.
Sure.
But Aerostich was not established to make me rich. It was established to give me something to do with my life that I believed in, and hopefully it would make enough money to allow it to continue. So that's why the catalog is the way it is. It's become sort of obsolete nowadays. They're very expensive, as you know, as a print magazine creator. It's extremely expensive, and the cost of print, even before the internet, forced it created the profession of journalism, because you couldn't afford, even when the internet didn't exist, you couldn't afford to put just any old opinion in there. You had to have educated people. You had to have Kevin Cameron and
Right.
Peter Egan and all these people that were predecessors to you had to know how to write and had to know how to think. And when you went to a newsstand and bought a print magazine or you looked at an Aerostich catalog, it was so expensive you couldn't just lollygag around and put anything you wanted in there like you can on the internet.
Sure. Yeah.
So it helped
Well, I
a
mean,
lot.
you're right. I mean, it not only entertains, but it informs. I mean, if someone is
Right.
considering certain motorcycles, certain products, and so even though there was, I mean, that's what the Aerostich catalog had, kind of an editorial component to it. Like I said, you could
Right.
learn
That's
about
exactly.
motorcycling, not just what to buy. And I found that
Exactly.
valuable. It had this kind of insider club sort of feel to it, where we were all sort of part of this little group. And yeah, I mean, all kinds of unexpectedly useful products. One of the things that you sent me to test years ago, and it is still something that I use all the time, is the LP bag, the lightweight portable bag, which is just,
That's
it's a ripstop nylon. It has straps where you can wear it as a backpack. I think you could probably stuff a helmet in there, but I take
yep.
that with me everywhere because it basically folds up into just about the size of my fist. I take it on every trip. It ends up being my laundry bag. It ends up being
Yep.
everything. And I just interviewed Dr. Greg Frazier for the podcast. He's always, in photos, he's always wearing an Aerostich suit. And he was telling me about the time he went across Russia and all he had was this map from the China Southern
Yeah.
Airplane magazine of the map of Russia and a compass that he got from you from his Aerostich compass. And that's how he made his way across Russia. So, yeah.
Well, let me put in a plug for you and the podcast. You gave him and he gave you a wonderful interview. The two of you produced something really fun to listen to. So if you're listening to me right now and you want a really good interview, a few times previous to this interview is the Greg Frazier, Greg Drevenstedt interview, and it's worth listening to. You guys had I enjoyed his stories and your questions very much.
Thanks. Yeah, he's a fun guy. I've only met him once in person many years ago in Thailand, of all places. But he gets around a lot of rallies, and hopefully we'll get to catch up with him soon.
And he, he's got his own purist kind of attitude. I don't know exactly what keeps him going in life anymore, really, sometimes than I know myself. But he's a one of a kind guy.
Sure.
He's a neat guy.
Yeah. Well, to be around the world, to have traveled around the world as many times as he has by motorcycle, he's a professed Luddite. Like he says, he doesn't have a smartphone. He doesn't use a GPS, and so he's somebody who's figured out how to travel the world and explore by his own wits, which, in the days of sat phones and everything else, it seems anachronistic, but at the same time, it's something that is, it's a purist approach to travel and adventure.
Yeah, he represents sort of a bygone era in motorcycle traveling when you're sort of on your own. What created today's adventure motorcycling market, quote unquote, is only three or four things. One was the motorcycles got very reliable, so you can depend on the bike to get you home, pretty much no matter where you are, and the smartphone and the GPS technology. So you can't get lost. You always can call somebody, and the bike isn't going to break down. But when Greg started doing it, those things weren't there, none of those. So it became very manageable for the average person to decide to ride to Alaska in my lifetime and in yours.
Right. Yes, he's definitely one of those trailblazers that, is when people do something first or do it multiple times, that's when other people realize that it's possible. So I wonder, speaking of, Dr. Frazier, he's, like I said, nearly every photo I've ever seen him in, if he's wearing riding gear, he's got an Aerostich suit on. Years ago, I had an opportunity to meet John Ryan after Melissa Holbrook Pilson wrote her book, The Man Who Would Stop at Nothing. And he was known for his Aerostich suit. He often had the NASA patch on it.
Yes, he did.
It was often, you couldn't even really tell what its true color was because it had so much road grime on it. But I would think that would be gratifying to know that people that are some of the most dedicated long distance motorcycle riders, choose the Aerostich suit.
I think it is very gratifying. There's A lot of motorcycling is done to be the coolest person in the room or the fastest, and that's legitimate. But when we started out, I wanted Aerostich gear to not be something that needed to be revised every 2 years. When they sell soap in a grocery store, detergent for your laundry, often the package will say new and improved, Tide or Oxidol or whatever the brand is. And basically, it's the same old soap 99% of the time with the words new and improved on the box because that helps sales. And so when some of our direct competitors restyle their garment every 24 months or every 18 months, and they run ads in all the magazines and promote the heck out of it. This is the latest. This is the greatest. This is new and improved. This is better technology. In my view, the truth is that there have only been about 3 major technologies for protective armored riders' clothing. They had the British wax cotton, which came from offshore fishermen, commercial fishermen in the UK and in Wales, Scotland, 100 years ago. And then they had denim, which came out of America's Old West, basically, in jackets and pants. And then they had leather, and there's a basic history to that. And then they had the modern textiles, like what we started pioneering. And once you design and invent, like a Levi 501 button fly blue jean, 18 whatever it was, pretty hard to make that new and improved. But that doesn't stop people who want to make money from trying. So they'll put decorative stitching on the back pocket, or they'll put artificially tears into the fabric, and 13-year-old girls will eat it up, and they'll buy all the torn jeans with decorative stitching, and they'll feel really pretty, and they are really pretty, and it's all wonderful. But it's not really a better blue jean than the old Levi's 501 made in 18 whatever. And the same is true with synthetic textile armored riders clothing. You can put all the pockets you want on, all the zippers you want, all the vents, all the reflective. We try to use something that philosophers call Occam's razor, which is how simple can you make it? How light can you make it? What's the least you need to make it do its job? And so Aerostich's gear isn't new and improved every 18 months. It's refined. We make detailed changes as things come out. I think we've had 3 different generations of 3M reflective on there. 3M's improved their product. It's more durable. It's better in so many different little ways. So we switch to it, or we change the way we sew a pocket to make it a little easier. But basically the design is from 10 feet away, it looks the same as it did in 1984. Because there was no competitor reference points when I was starting to do this. I had to draw on a piece of paper. I want it to be this way. I think I'm going to want to be able to carry a quart of milk in the front pocket. So we have this big long front pocket. Or I think I want to be able to put the toll road change in the sleeve pocket so that if I'm going on a toll road, I pull up to the toll booth. Do I want to put it on the left sleeve or the right sleeve? Well, if it's on the left sleeve, then riders will sit there in the toll thing in first gear with their clutch pulled in, and they'll fumble it and they'll fall over. So it better be on the right sleeve to force riders to go into neutral at the toll booth. So when they fish out the dollar for the toll booth, they're not sitting there holding the clutch in. So there was a million little decisions on how I wanted the thing to function as a tool, as a piece of equipment. And that's what we still make today. And the result is that, like you said earlier, the people who ride a lot of miles know the difference.
Sure.
That they don't care really what it looks like. We have a lot of jokes that it's an antiphrodisiac, which is a word that the word for making somebody sexually attractive is using an aphrodisiac.
Right.
But there's actually a word in the dictionary, an antiphrodisiac or something like that. And so that's what we spray on the suits, we joke, because it's just good equipment. And the size grading system, we have 60 sizes. So we touched on this earlier. If you use a tool every day, it needs to fit. Right. Nobody would run a marathon in flip-flops, I don't think. You want a certain width shoe, a certain length shoe, and if you're running, it better fit comfortably if you're going to do 26 miles. And if you're using a riding suit every day or a riding jacket every day, like Greg does, you want it to be as light as possible, as cool as possible, as simple as possible, and you want the pockets in places where you can really use them. And you look around at the plethora of wonderful rider's gear of all different descriptions. And a lot of it is not as light, as simple, as functional, as much of a tool as what we make. Even though in the marketing area, they will claim it. It's always, we've invented a better jacket, but really not.
Well,
Soap is soap.
and in that regard, I mean, this is something that some people may know, is that you talk about off the rack sizes for Aerostich suits, but you do have the, because you make them yourself there in Minnesota, is somebody that is unusually tall or got other, body size, that may not fit one of your standard sizes. You can have them custom tailored. You can have, and you also offer different variations on the suit that people can pay to have them
Yep.
customized.
Yep.
You can have them
So,
repaired as well. I mean, that is something that you also do,
yep.
whether not just for crashes, but if there's a problem with a zipper or a pocket or something like that, is you can have it sent back to Aerostich and have it repaired.
Yeah, right. It makes a real difference if you're riding 200 or 250 days a year, and which not many people do. We both know that the average motorcycle in America is ridden like 1,800 miles a year. That's one trip and a few weekends. But if you're commuting, it's a little more.
Right.
The average car, I think, is driven 12,000 miles a year.
Right. Right.
So that's why we do things the way we do them.
Well, you had mentioned earlier that on June 21st, so that's coming up pretty soon, from when we're recording this, is going to be the 30th annual Ride to Work Day, and that's the International Motorcycle and Scooter Ride to Work Day. And
right.
Tell us a little bit about that. I know this is something that you're an advocate for, is the idea that motorcycling is a public good, and that this is one day that
it's a social good. You see the bump. Many people have seen the bumper sticker on a bicycle or something that says "one less car." But we spent 100 years building a wonderful industrial infrastructure. The Industrial Revolution is over; it happened, and now we live miles from where we work, and the roads are congested, and then all kinds of people yelling at us about the environment or climate or whatever. Motorcycles are good for us. They reduce road congestion. They create more parking spaces. And if I was running governments, I would do everything I could to encourage more people to adopt daily, regular motorcycling, because it makes you a better husband or wife or student or teacher or taxpayer or whatever you are. And the statistics about the risk of motorcycling, the chance of getting injured and killed, are artificially, or not artificially, that's the wrong word. They're biased, because when you have a population of consumers using motorcycles 1,200 miles a year, they're riding recreationally on unfamiliar roads. They're playing with the motorcycle to see if they can make this corner or do a wheelie or how fast they can turn or stop. Sometimes there's alcohol in the mix. So you've got people riding unfamiliar roads that don't ride very well, sometimes drinking, and you get a lot of accidents.
Sure.
But if you look at the California Highway Patrol officers who are riding 40 or 50 or 60,000 miles a year between the lanes on LA freeways, they never crash because they know what they're doing. And you, Greg, who are riding a motorcycle to work every day, are very unlikely to, not that you couldn't, not that I couldn't, but when you are fluent, when you do something, fluency comes with frequency, and you become a much safer than the statistical norm rider just by default. If you start riding almost every day, you don't have to ride if it's super adverse weather or whatever, but if you're riding almost every day, you kind of learn how to read traffic, evolving situations, and you're not playing with the motorcycle. If you're on a commute, chances are you're on the same roads almost every day, and you see almost the same other drivers around you. And there are commutes that admittedly are full of people who aren't good to be around on a motorcycle. There's been plenty of times when I've been in a busy road. A year or two ago, I've ridden out to New York City maybe 5 times in my lifetime. And I'm not really fond of riding around certain parts of New York City because it's a very challenging traffic environment. But John Ryan did every day for most of his life. And even though he was killed on a motorcycle accident, it was probably, I think, maybe a road rage thing that he didn't. I suspect there was something not quite. The accident report will never probably be released, but
Yeah,
you
some health,
get good
he had some
and
health
say,
challenges too. There's a number of factors that could have been involved for
right.
sure.
My main point is you get much safer statistically if you're riding frequently. It's
Sure.
the same with airplanes. You know, when Scully put the airplane down in the Hudson River,
Yeah.
he knew what he was doing. Had a lot of flight time,
Right.
and that's the same with the people who ride a lot. You get safe. It becomes safer.
Well, it's because I live in California and I've commuted on the freeway many, many times, day after day after day. And some people that live in states that do not allow lane sharing, lane filtering, lane splitting, whatever you want to call it, often think that, wow, that's crazy. Why would you do that? But actually, studies have shown that it's actually safer because you're not actually
Right.
sandwiched between the front and rear bumpers of cars in your lane. You're between the cars. You can see much farther down the road. You're less likely to get hit from behind, which is how most traffic accidents in congested areas
Yep.
happen. And when there's no such thing as a small fender bender when a car and a motorcycle are involved. So,
Right.
and I've been doing it for years, and actually it's you develop almost kind of like a sixth sense or a spider sense where you can see slight variations in cars movement. You can see a driver look in their side view mirror or something, and so you do develop an ability to anticipate and see things coming before they happen, and you're not as boxed in and vulnerable as you are in cars.
Yep.
And so it's one of those things that I know it's starting to become. Several more states have started to allow it, and it's, I think, going to be very good for traffic safety and congestion.
Yep. And what the public sees when they're waiting in their idling cars in those 8-lane freeways out there is they'll see some 17, 18-year-old kid zoom by at 40 miles an hour over the whatever they're, too fast between the lanes. And they'll say, oh, motorcycles, blah, 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 terrible. That's not how you lane split, I'm sure.
Right.
You know how to do it and so do all the California Highway Patrol officers, so that it's relatively safe, much safer than the public thinks, because the public will see the kid on the Ninja going by or whatever crotch rocket going by with no pipe at a high rate of speed, and that isn't safe. But
Sure.
that's California when they wrote lane splitting into law recently, a couple years, 3 years ago, I think maybe they said the differential of speed between the stop traffic and your speed is limited to so many miles an hour, which is safe.
Right.
So it's
Well,
Ride
that's
to
one of the,
Work Day.
yeah, yeah,
Ride to Work Day is really all about letting the public know that ordinary A to B motorcycling is safe, is a social benefit to everyone. It makes the world better. It makes the people who do it better. It's Ride to Work Day is about telling that story, which isn't told a lot in motorcycling, because frankly, motorcycling is so exciting and so fun. If you don't do it regularly, every time you get on it, you're thrilled to, but once you become normalized to riding, it's still just as much fun, but it becomes much safer.
right. And that's obviously one of the challenges that we deal with as motorcyclists in the United States is culturally, as you said, when you were growing up and you were riding motorcycles, you had friends, you had family members that kept asking you, why are you still doing that? Why are you still riding a motorcycle? When are you going to grow up? Having had the opportunity to ride many times in Europe, there's just a different mindset. One is that
Yep.
part of it is the cost of fuel and the cost of vehicles and so forth, the congestion in cities, and the design of some of the roads is that motorcycling is much more common as a regular form, as a primary form of transportation. And there's
Yes.
less cultural aversion to motorcyclists in Europe. And so it's, that is one of the challenges. Also, lane splitting, lane sharing is common. You can park on most sidewalks in cities. There are just many
Right.
fewer restrictions to where it's not only encouraged, but it becomes, for some people, it's really the only cost-effective way for them to have transportation that isn't public transport.
Yes. Yeah, and you see people of all ages going on motorcycles, hauling their groceries or hauling their children to school or whatever. I have a coworker at Aerostich who took his kid to school on the back of a Kawasaki 650 for years when the kid was a little kid. Coolest kid in grade school by far.
Absolutely.
And things happen. There's a philosophic point of what are laws really, and laws have a tendency to just sort of sanctify and bless what our natural behaviors are. So all over the world, um, in Asia and in Europe and in South America, the natural thing to do if you're on a motorcycle in a traffic situation is to use the motorcycle's nimbleness and narrowness to snake through the traffic. And here in America, you're considered a horrible hooligan if you're doing that, mainly because America is the only country in the world that went right to automobiles. We had motorcycles and cars in 1912, 1913, 1910, 1908, but Henry Ford came along, invented mass production, and started putting Model Ts in every farmer's barn. And the rest is history, as the saying goes. We went right to cars. So we're out there as a minority in traffic. And when you're a minority, you're scapegoated. You know how, I mean, but we have the freedom to ride, and it is a good thing for everybody. We are just not tolerated like they're tolerated in Asia and in Europe and in South America as normal transportation. This is a wonderful transportation option. And if you happen to own an Aerostich coverall or some other good quality riding gear, you don't even have to wait for a nice day.
Right, right. Well, I know that, once I got my Aerostich and I would be able to zip in and out of it. And I know in the past that you've hosted the very boring rally there in Minnesota. And I don't know if it's just there or maybe some BMW rallies. You will sometimes have contests to see who can get in and out of an Aerostich suit the fastest.
Right. We do the very boring rally every 5 years. And the longer we do them, the more boring they get, but they are fun. And the idea is to just use your motorcycle like you'd use your car, unless you need to haul a big bulky object, or unless the weather is too atrocious for you to tolerate. Here in Duluth, Minnesota, I know a little about atrocious weather. So there is limits.
I'm sure. Well, Andy, you've been very generous with your time. Is there anything you want to mention again? I know we've talked about Aerostich and the Roadcrafter, and we've got Ride to Work Day coming up. So hopefully, I know a lot of people are working from home now. Maybe they'll just use that as an excuse to go out for a ride on a Monday on June 21st.
We sure hope they will. It's hard to measure the impact of an event like Ride to Work Day. It is worldwide. We have tried to figure out how many more people ride on Ride to Work Day by counting motorcyclists passing under an overpass on a regular Monday and then on the Ride to Work Day Monday, and it is more. And so it might be the world's largest motorcycle event by numbers of participants. If you are listening to this and you want to go riding or ride to work on Ride to Work Day, do it. And if anyone asks you about your bike, tell them how great it is. And that's the whole purpose of the event. And like your other guest recently, Greg Fraser, I want to tell you how much I enjoyed this opportunity. I've met you a couple of times, and I love what you're doing with Rider Magazine. I've been reading it since 40 years or whatever it's been.
Sure.
It's a wonderful magazine, and I know you're carrying on, juggling wearing a lot of hats these days. But you put out a great magazine, and I enjoy it very much, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to talk to your audience.
Thank you, Andy. It's been an honor to work for Rider for a number of years and to take over for Mark Tuttle, who really steered the ship, for 32 years as editor-in-chief. And so he left really big shoes to fill, but he was a great mentor for the time that I worked with him. And so I appreciate all the support that you've provided to us, not just, ads in the magazine, but products we've been able to test. I've been able to wear Roadcrafter suits. So yeah, it's a pleasure. And thanks for all that you do for motorcycling, really, with the Ride to Work Day, with Aerostich and the Roadcrafter suit. We'll have links in the show notes. So thanks. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Great. So for Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, I'm Greg Drevenstedt. Thanks for listening, and keep the rubber side down. If you've enjoyed listening to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, please subscribe, leave us a positive rating, and tell your friends. We also encourage you to visit ridermagazine.com, where you can get the latest in motorcycle news and reviews and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to print and digital editions of Rider Magazine, which is published 12 times a year. Thanks again for listening.